Good evening, everyone. If you've been following world news closely over the past few months, or let's say years, you might have encountered articles that talk about the Indian government and its biased policies against multiple ethnic, linguistic, and religious groups, the standoff at borders with neighboring countries, and depending on your news source, a wide variety of pro and anti opinions on a variety of issues. But is it possible that these were the only things happening in a country of 1.38 billion people? Headlines determine how we perceive our world, and so it seems unfair to me that my perception is being shaped by others, who determine what goes into print based on what sells and what spreads, irrespective of the divisions they cause in the community. In a recent conversation I had with a professor, an interesting question arose. Why is it that media outlets and newspaper bureaus and us as people, why do we keep hearing and sharing mostly bad news? Last week, I looked up India on Google and went to the news tab, and all I saw were stories of murders and calamities in the same cities that those headlines came from. There must have been a multitude of positive events. Why do I not get to hear about those? Bad news or narratives often hold the power to overshadow positive aspects of a community. There is always goodness to be found, even in the most despairing situations, and this goodness is inherent to humanity, and given a chance, it shines through and transcends the dividing lines of color, caste, class, race, and age. And when I talk of negative narratives, I'm not suggesting that the news should stop reporting any and all unpleasantness completely. It is an unfortunate reality that the world we live in has adversities and distress in plenty. But the objective of these representations should be to elicit a response of change instead of catering to morbid curiosities. The screen behind me is cycling through some photos. This one. These are images by Danish Siddiqui, one of my favorite photographers and a Pulitzer Prize winning Indian photojournalist, documenting the COVID-19 pandemic in India. He actually won his second posthumous Pulitzer Prize for this series. The first one was for his coverage of the Rohingya refugee crisis. Unfortunately, he was killed while covering a conflict between the Afghan security forces and the Taliban, but his work lives on. Look at this image, for instance. This image depicts people waiting to cremate victims who died due to the coronavirus at a crematorium ground in New Delhi on April 23rd, 2021. There were so many people dying in a single day that playgrounds had to be turned into cremation grounds. When I look at this picture, I'm filled with a pull of emotion towards the people in it, people I have never known. And this is the power of real journalism and good media, to stir people into action. And these pictures show us that deaths are not just statistics, and havoc is not just a headline. For every digit of every number that we see, there are people just like you and me who suffer. And while I speak mostly about the place that I come from, there are similar stories to be found across the world. And I'm not just talking about the pandemic. Earthquakes, floods, landslides, and war, they all bring with them a slew of statistics like these. On your screen right now are some of the statistics about the pandemic in India, and it was a global adversity, a global pandemic. While they do a great job of providing us with a countable number of deaths or the number of cases in a day, how do you quantify the loss of a loved one? How do you express the anguish of the even larger number of people who now have to live with incomplete families? Statistics, though obviously helpful in a lot of ways, have the same attribute of detachment that hold no change-making impact. I say this because I have experienced them both. I saw Siddiqui's photos as they came, and I saw the numbers as they climbed from the comfort of my bedroom, because I was fortunate enough to be fed and cared for while the disease raged on outside. And though both Danish's photos and the statistics dealt with the same issues, they brought about a different sentimental response. The shared experiences of these responses bring people together. And this was perhaps one of the reasons we saw people cut across divisions to reach out to each other. It is unfortunate that this shared experience had to be that of grief. In an even more hopeful direction as to the news that makes the headlines, I have some stories that help reinstate our hope in humanity still. The first is that of a young boy who was still in his final year of high school, and he lost his father to COVID. And yet, just a few days later, he was answering hundreds of phone calls each day, helping people find access to necessary medical equipment like oxygen cylinders. And then there was the Chief Minister of Kerala, Mr. Pinarayi Vijayan, who tweeted about the story of an old man who donated about 200,000 rupees to the Chief Minister's Distress Relief Fund and was left with only 850 rupees. And to put that in context, he donated about 2,500 US dollars and was left with only 10. And when I talk of Twitter, it reminds me that Twitter became a platform for people who were looking for help with resources and contacts, as government helplines failed under the huge upsurge of cases. But none of these people had to do what they were doing. But their own losses and their own experiences drove them to do so. And in the light of it all, there are still certain elements that seek to disunite. I read a piece in the Los Angeles Times once, which essentially blamed particular religious groups, debated, and announced the verdict, all in one article. This headline was supposed to tell me what I needed to know, but it went one, or actually several steps further, to completely inform me of their opinion and ensure that I had gotten it. It is unfortunate that in our times, bad media makes more headlines and is more alluring to people than good. And this is what I mean about the sentimental response that the media we consume evokes in us. The way things are worded makes a lot of impact on the way we perceive their meaning. It can incite violence, create cracks along the fault lines that already exist in society, and end up dividing us over the various labels we wear, that of religion, of gender, and of region and color. These are attributes that make up parts of who we are, but are never our entire identity. As I leave this stage tonight, I want to make a general appeal of hope that we as people are able to look beyond our attributes, these labels that we wear, and extend a helping hand and a first step. Because no matter our differences, we are humans first and share one common identity among us all, humanity. Thank you.